Hi everybody, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode, you've all been waiting for this one. This is episode 100 of Album of the Day, in which today's going to be a pretty special review. You can pretty much tell by the shirt I'm wearing. Because my motto is, if you're going to review a Dr. Dog album, you got to at least do it in the right shirt. In which, today I'm going to talk about this Philadelphia indie sort of psychedelic rock band that, I've been a fan of since late 2012 and have been friends with these guys since 2013. So I've had a pretty strong connection to them for the last few years. The band's name is Dr. Dog. They formed back in 1999. Basically just a kind of a solo project originally from co-songwriters and singers Scott McMicken and Toby Lehman, in which one plays guitar, the latter one plays bass in the band. Excuse me. And, I think, they've had a pretty good run from, when they first started out in the early 2000s up to this point. Now in the 2010s. They're one band that, in my opinion, has never put out a bad album. Well, it kind of makes sense because, I'm friends with these guys and, I would pretty much want to be very supportive of them. So I'm here to review their most recent album, which came out back in February 5th to be exact, of this year. Excuse me. The album is called The Psychedelic Swamp. And this album the songs on this record aren't actually new songs. This is actually some of Dr. Dog's oldest songs to date. Re-recorded out of their never released or factory press debut album. Excuse me, I just have a little phlegm. Sorry about that, but anyway, this is actually a reworking of the band's never released debut album, which was sometime around 2001. There's only one new song on here, but anyway, here's the front cover. I do think the front cover looks really nice, and there's the liner notes there, some artwork, there's the disc. So the packaging is kind of lacking in bells and whistles a little bit, but oh well. Compared to Dr. Dog's last album, where the insert was a big poster with lyrics, and I thought that was pretty awesome. But yeah, that's just the packaging for the Psychedelic Swamp. So, on paper, re-recording some of your oldest songs sounds kind of hit or miss, or kind of boring or stuff like that, but no, not the case here with this album. There have been some divided opinions on it. Some people may say it sounds too much like their older stuff, and that it's not experimental enough, or that the songwriting is, lacking something. Some may say that, but, I think, so, which I think makes sense. I mean, you probably would think that if you didn't pay all that close attention to what's going on in the record. But if you just listen a little more carefully, you'll realize these are actually very, very good songs. And they reimagined them in such a way that makes them feel more like, just a very, very solid indie pop album. That does have a little chunk of weird to it. It makes sense they would kind of rearrange these songs and rework them and try to figure out how to arrange them as more like complete songs instead of just a bunch of weird, hard to listen to lo-fi demos. Because I will tell you this, I actually have heard a lot of the older recordings of some of these songs, and not really a huge fan of them. They're kind of hard to listen to, and very just kind of weird, just a bunch of noises. But here they, think of them as more like full songs, and they sound a lot better on here, and a lot more, fresh on here, and they sort of imagine them the way you would if they were new songs or something like that. So yeah, it makes sense they would do all this because they did do a Swampadelic show back in September, which is basically it was like a theatrical sort of rock opera sort of thing, which makes sense because I think that's kind of how they put together this record as kind of a rock opera a little bit. Although it may not be as cinematic as the Decemberists' The Hazards of Love or anything like that, it's still kind of technically sort of a rock opera at its core in the sense of the story that it tells. But yeah, anyway, let's just get on to the tracks, shall we? The opening track on here is called Golden Hind, and this track, starts off pretty nice with a spine-tingling baritone riff from Scott McMicken. It's got sort of this wall of acoustic guitar, giving it this kind of folky, almost all country kind of feel. But one distinctive part of the song is actually the vocal. The vocal on this track is not by Scott, not by Toby. This one is actually the lead vocal on this track is actually provided by an older member of Dr. Dog named Doug O'Donnell, and he did write this song too. So the people are saying this vocal sounds terrible. What if one of their voices is pitched down or something like that? You're obviously listening to it wrong because you don't realize that it's actually an older member coming in to do that vocal, and it has this just raw sort of emotion to it. Yeah, it really grew on me. Like, I wasn't really a fan of the vocal at first because it didn't really sound like Toby to me, but it really grew on me, and I think the vocal on here he nailed it, giving this sort of raw, intimate feel to the track, and its lyrics kind of, his relationship with this girl that he's with while he's in the swamp, starts out pretty positive, but then eventually things kind of, go down, but then things start to, go bad, and then swamp life starts to get frustrating to him. So yeah, that's kind of what that song's about lyrically. Then you get into the track Dead Record Player, where the lyrics on here are a little more dark and vivid, because he notices that when he listens to records by the Beatles or the Monkees, he likes the sound of them, but yet at the same time there's something terrible going on because his records seem to want him dead. To the point where he's sort of where he can't get up while listening to his albums. So it's pretty dark and a pretty horrifying situation that he's in right now. So it's sort of pretty vivid, but at the same time very interesting and imaginative imagery lyrically to pair with a kind of upbeat classic Dr. Dog melody driven by harmonies and an awesome riff, and of course Eric Slick's kind of rough around the edges drumming on here, and the ending of the song is pretty weird. It has this weird little voice along with some sort of high and low fidelity sound effects. The voice is saying, "The music is killing me. The high and low fidelities are attacking my brain," and it's terrific. So it really fits in with sort of the situation he's going on, and a pretty dramatic way to end this pretty upbeat sounding song that actually has a lot of depth to the lyrics. Then you get into Swampadelic pop, which would make sense on here because it is sort of a 60s pop piece dealing with what this person is surrounded by while he's in this place called the Swamp, that apparently it's made up by Dr. Dog, but they kind of tell the story as if it were real or something like that, and make it believable or something like that. There's lyrics in here about when liars tell the truth, when liars tell the truth, it's the opposite of talking, and and it's the distance that's blocking off the sound, and all that. So like, musically, it's got this kind of 60s pop feel, has this really, really nice, like, sort of, joyous keyboard solo at like, the beginning and the end, provided by Zach Miller. That's, kind of, it's kind of this, puffy little keyboard that occurs in the background, that occurs and plays a really nice solo on here, which, would normally be provided by a guitar or something like that. And then in the middle, it sort of strips down to mostly like a drum machine and a few keyboards, as well as sort of this echoey voice going on there too. Then next we get into the like only new song on the album, which is "Bring My Baby Back," and this track, I think is definitely one of the highlights on this album, because one of the reasons I really like this tune so much is Toby Lehman's vocal on it is just, so emotional, and it, fits in with kind of this frustrating situation he's in, where, the one he loves is like, sort of, caught up with the radio and, stuff like that, and like, and then of course he sort of, has this kind of feeling of rage, and, which makes it hard for him to sweep the floor and easier for him to like, watch it all burn. So he's trying to like, and he's trying to hide all his like, tears inside, and plus there's a little bit of absurdity to the lyrics, like Judas Iscariot selling you rope, man on the radio selling you dope, as well as like, love is a joke but fate is hilarious, does what he wants, sort of talks about death as if it were a person or stuff like that. So yeah, definitely one of my favorite lyrical moments on the album, and Toby Lehman's vocals on here, have this kind of raw sort of feel to it, and it's sort of, essentially a pop rock song, but then with a few other weird things, like some buzzing little effects in the background that pair with the acoustic guitar and piano, some like electronic drums on here, as well as kind of the weird vocal effects on Toby Lehman's voice. And then, of course, it's really in the middle where he just belts it out with his sort of emotional, almost tearful howl on here that I think just sounds great on there. It has a catchy little hook there on the chorus of "Make them pay and make them bring my baby back to me." The next track on here is the relatively short track that's just stirring the whole album together, "Holes in My Back," which is basically nothing more than, some spooky little keyboard stabs, some drums, Scott McMicken's vocal singing, like, holes are in my back, souls are coming back now. So it's kind of an epic chorus repeated over and over again. So yeah, that's kind of what it is. So it's basically there to tie the whole record together, and while it is kind of repetitive, it still sounds pretty nice on there. In the context of this record, it wouldn't really make that much sense in its own, and it makes a lot more sense in the context of this record, especially before the very next track on this album, "Fire on My Back," which has this kind of silly kind of absurdity in the lyrics going on here, but at the same time it really works. So this is the kind of song where you're not going to want to listen to this album in the background, especially with this song. If you don't pay close attention to it enough, well then it may sound kind of obnoxious, but if you listen to it more carefully, you'll realize that this track is actually pretty interesting. I mean, there's a lot of rhyming in the lyrics, like "born uninvisible," like just metaphysical and stuff like that. And like, pop culture quizzical, down with the mystical, you know, and he actually does say, I don't know if I really have the guts to say this, but he actually says, like, failed on my testicles, I slapped him with a battery, which, that line may sound kind of cringeworthy initially, but actually it tends to work a little bit in the sense of the kind of, weird sort of avant-garde absurdity of this track. I mean, the lyrics on this track actually kind of remind me of the song Il Scorcho off Weezer's second album, Pinkerton. So yeah, it kind of reminds me of Weezer a little bit in the sense of the absurd lyrics, like what El Scorcho has, and even the melody on here kind of reminds me of that a little bit, except not as much viscera here as there was on the chorus of El Scorcho. Joe there. So it kind of reminds me of Weezer a little bit before they eventually got old, but don't worry, they redeemed themselves in the 2000s. Next we get into the track Swamp Descent, which is basically an instrumental piece with some really gorgeous and just, colorful vocal harmonies on there. Pairing that with just an acoustic guitar and like a kind of sad, somber slide guitar on there, while there's a bunch of, while there's kind of, swampy, walls of effects going on here. Oh, I also forgot to mention on Fire on My Back, I do like Scott McMicken's vocal performance on there. Very descriptive. I mean, there's a point in the song where he sings in a higher note, which actually kind of reminds me maybe of Queen a little bit. So yeah, I talked about Swamp Descent there, and that thing in Fire in My Back that I forgot to mention. Next we get into Engineer Says, which actually kind of sounds like it could have come out of the We All Belong playbook a little bit, especially because of its slide guitar, plus there's this upright bass in there that actually kind of reminds me maybe of Calexico a little bit. And then Toby, of course, there's like, drums and organ, and Toby comes in with his vocal and he talks about where I like how the lyrics are kind of references to things that happened before, like phrases left his body on the tracks and now calls the swamp his home, even though he says that swamp living is killing him. And then of course the one he loves, tells the Navy to bring him back, and she kind of causes the simple plea that that Phrases has is to get back to his loved one. So that's kind of where the song "Bring My Baby Back" came from. Sort of thing. And of course also there's the use of, there's actually maybe a little bit of a soul feel, but not quite. But there's like a little bit of female backups. There's like some female backup singers on here, as well as the use of a saxophone, which is played by this guy nicknamed Mr. Tidy Paws. Wonder what his real name is, but there is a saxophone there, and I do like that part at the end where the saxophone is playing these kind of stuttery, almost kind of nervous sort of notes at the end. I really like that part. It's on there, so that's one example of the band using an unusual instrument there. Next there's the kind of romantic track, In Love, which basically strips everything down to like an acoustic guitar, a piano, maybe some upright bass, and drums. And then of course, the lyrics sort of, talk about sort of the troubled relationship that, Phrases and his loved one are in. So like he's looking for a girl, but that girl is all he sees, and he just feels like he needs something more. So it's kind of like that point in the romantic comedy where the couple kind of argues with each other, and one part of the couple thinks there has to be something more of something, and then of course there's like some And of course, Scott does give a pretty emotional sort of vocal performance to this track. And there's the and then of course there's like the really nice harmonies going on in the second verse, and then there's some female backup vocals singing like "In Love," on the chorus there. Next track on here is Swamp Inflammation, and I would say this is my least favorite track on here, but it makes sense because I was never really a huge fan of the older Psychedelic Swamp recordings, even though I did like a few of them, but for the most part it was kind of all over the place. So basically, they just took this from the collection of older recordings, basically kind of a voice talk, saying like, swamp living is killing me, to pair with some weird kind of effects and drums, so nothing too interesting going on there with that track. But I do love the next track on here, Badvertise. Very, very, very cool song right here. It's definitely one of the noisier, more raucous tracks on here, especially with the fuzzy bass line and as well as, effects sort of swirling around everywhere, and lyrically it's kind of, Badvertise. That sort of deals maybe a little bit with maybe Badvertise probably deals with maybe like sort of marketing and like wanting your money back or something like that, and sort of talking about that, and then of course the guitars come in, and then of course the guitars come in, and Scott sounds as if maybe he's singing maybe into some sort of weird sort of radioactive microphone or something like that on this track. Plus I really like the warbling theremin in the background, and also there's weird voices like buyers, spiders beware going on in the background. So yeah, really a great track. It might sound obnoxious to some, but I think it's really, really badass. I know it's not the best word to say, but it is. But then there's the track Good Grief, which is kind of alt country, kind of like Golden Hind, but then it has very noticeable little keyboard stabs in the background, giving it a little bit of maybe a little electric feel to it as well. Which I think is a pretty nice combination on this track. And then it closes with Swamp Is On, which features a bunch of samples from the older Psychedelic Swamp recordings. But then they create this really nice sort of colorful panoramic piece with acoustic guitar, keyboards, effects, drums, and then just really just gorgeous, harmonies on there, that definitely show Dr. Dog just, going for just, some really nice beauty that, sort of gives you this feeling of maybe, sort of gives you this feeling of floating through the sky a little bit. It's this kind of magical feel that Dr. Dog, sort of gives me when I listen to their music. Not to be cheesy here, but, it's true. So yeah, I do think this is a really great album, and I think it's definitely sort of a big, I think it was really sort of a brave idea for them to try to record some of these songs that they initially sort of balked at to see if they sounded good again, and I will admit that they've definitely learned how to, have a little fun with it, and make it not really feel like pressure anymore once they realize that these were actually compelling songs. Just the older recordings of them weren't really all that great. But yeah, just if you're a Dr. Dog fan, I definitely would recommend you give this album a try. I know Dr. Dog isn't for everyone. I know Pitchfork's given at least maybe every album of theirs maybe a 5 out of 10, but, me personally, I think they're a fantastic band, so, yeah. So, yeah, highly recommend this record, if you're a fan. It's kind of short. It's 13 songs, but it's only like about 40 minutes, but yeah, I'm really digging it, so... That's my review of the album, The Psychedelic Swamp, the revamped version by Dr. Dog. I'll see you for episode 101. Yes, 101, people.